In this section, I'm going to demonstrate how to run Jenkins locally. The reason for doing this is it gives you a way to work on, let's say, experimental changes without having to rely on some shared and central Jenkins instance. This is done using Docker Compose instead of having to run a long Docker command or scripting in order to configure the container environment. Specifically, the Docker Compose file here is what's defining the image we're pulling, in this case the long-term support version of Jenkins, that we have to run as root. This is a no-no, by the way. You do not want to do this in production. The ports we have to open, Jenkins will be hosted on port 8080, the container name, along with the volumes. Don't worry about this Docker socket mapping. This is just for it to work inside a container. The important mapping is Jenkins home. Behind the scenes, Jenkins maintains all of the information on the file system as a series of XML and other files. If we weren't to persist that information outside of the container, as soon as we started up a new container, we lose all the information. So what's going to happen is that when we launch Jenkins for the first time, it's going to store all of its configuration data inside this Jenkins home folder within our project. To start this, we're going to run Docker Compose up with a -d. -d is going to run it in a detached mode. This means that it's going to just launch it and then go right back to the command line. If you're using Docker Desktop, you can click on it and see the log output. Because this is a first-time installation of Jenkins, we're going to be asked for an administrative password. This password is going to be found in the log, and we're going to want to copy that from when we launch Jenkins. This is where we're going to paste in the administrative password we pulled from the logs. We're going to want to go ahead and install the suggested plugins, and this is going to take a while. When Jenkins is done downloading the entire internet, it's going to ask you to create the first administrative user. So now we have Jenkins up and running locally. You can additionally verify the persistence by looking in the Jenkins home directory within inside the project. You'll see a series of XML files and folders representing user content. Now though, we have to connect Jenkins to source control. This is going to be the GitHub account we set up earlier, specifically its SSH key. This is done by first adding an SSH username with private key type credential. Manage Jenkins. Manage credentials. System. Global credentials. Add credentials. Select the SSH username with private key. Give it a name. I typically make the ID the same as the description. The username is going to be your GitHub account username. And then you're going to have to go and enter the private key directly. Then enter the passphrase used to sign the key originally during generation. The connection to github.com via an SSH key won't work initially though. This is because Jenkins requires an explicit host name strategy telling it what things it can talk to and which it can't. To change this, go to Manage Jenkins, Configure Global Security, look where it says Get Host Key Verification. And for local purposes, we're going to say no verification. Ideally, you're going to want to have a list of hosts that you allow Jenkins to talk to, and this is where you would set that. In order to verify that the connection to GitHub works, we're going to create a temporary test job. In this case, we're just going to create a job called Get Connection. That's a freestyle project that we're going to use to try and pull this using the SSH key. We're going to select Git as the source code management system, And then we're going to go back to our example project and get the SSH URL. Then we're going to select our SSH credentials. And if it works, the error will go away. Note here though that the default branch is master in Jenkins, but because we're using GitHub, our default branch is main, so we have to change to that. Next, just to verify we got everything, what we're going to do is we're going to add a build step that's just a shell that's going to do an ls and just show us the content of the directory. We're then going to run the job and look at the console output. You see that it worked because we didn't get an error. It used the credentials, and when we did an ls, we saw the content, a Docker Compose file, a README, and the wiki directory, which contains some of the pictures.